Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Circuit. I am Ben Bajarin, and I'm joined today by a wonderful, wonderful person who I've spent time getting to know and has lots of insights into this world of FPGAs, Esam Elashmawi, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer of Lattice. Esam, thanks for joining us. Maybe give us a quick, kind of background on who you are, where you came from, all that good stuff.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on your show and your podcast. Always an entertaining one, so I appreciate that I'm a guest here. My background, I think you said I'm Esam Elashmawi. I'm a Chief Strategy Marketing Officer for Lattice. I've been in the semiconductor industry for over 30 years. I just aged myself right there. Most of that time had something to do with FPGAs. I actually started my career as an engineer in an FPGA company. And here I am at Lattice, driving both strategy and marketing for FPGAs.
Awesome, awesome. So, when you and I first started talking a couple years ago, I just continually got super interested with FPGAs because they're so different when you think about the way that people are using, core compute, custom ASICs. Like it's a very, very different thing. And they're fascinating in their own right. I think they're also one of those things that's rather ambiguous. Like people think they totally understand who they are, what they can do, and their capabilities. But maybe let's just spend a minute and get back to the basics. Really break down what is an FPGA.
What is an FPGA? I think in one of our conversation you said if you can explain it to a 5-year-old, then everybody
Yes.
will get it. That's a challenge. But let me start off with FPGAs. What are they? If you look at, they're a semiconductor component. Semiconductor components are pervasive and everywhere. Anytime we have anything that's electronic or powered that has some intelligence, you've got semiconductor devices in there. And there's different categories of semiconductor devices. FPGAs, which stands for Field-Programmable Gate Array, are unique. And what they do is they're actually semiconductor devices that the end user can actually program or configure or download, however you want to use that term, the specific design or application they want on that semiconductor chip. And that's very, very unique because people tend to believe that semiconductors are predefined on what their functions are. But an FPGA is not. It's kind of like, remember growing up, we had those etch a sketches that we would kind of draw something, we can build something, you shake it, it erases it. Well, FPGAs, you figure out what is it you want to download or configure or put in as your application. You put it into the FPGA, and the beauty is you can erase it as well, and you can reprogram it. And so what that does, it allows you to address applications that a fixed function semiconductor cannot address. And it actually has some additional values from time to market and storing your secret sauce. So that's what an FPGA is. It's a programmable piece of semiconductor that's very pervasive across many, many applications.
That to me was the one thing that, as we talked about this, got super interesting because it really is. And this is kind of like when I tell other people when I'm like, hey man, you gotta like look at FPGAs when you think about kind of how you're building out your product, is that they really are a blank slate. And I think people kind of miss that. And I also think one of the more misunderstood parts is that literally almost every product out there has an FPGA of some sort on it. Just nobody talks about it. Like every company, every device you probably have in your pocket, wherever on your desk, has they just don't talk about it because it's used in so many diverse ways. And that to me is some of the most fascinating parts of an FPGA, and really just understanding the opportunity or the design decisions that come into using that for a vast array of different product type of markets.
We estimate that if you look at the past 10 years, there's more than 5 billion FPGAs that have been deployed. And if you look at the next 10 years with the changes that are happening in the industry and applications, we expect that there's going to be over 10 billion FPGAs deployed. So they are pervasive everywhere. And one of the unique things that people don't realize is Lattice actually has the largest installed base of FPGAs today.
Mm. Yeah, that's super interesting. So maybe just kind of go into a little bit about Lattice, and then we'll dig into a little bit more, some more about FPGAs. For anybody that's not familiar with the company, obviously, I think people have heard, right? FPGAs are, I want to say, hot-ish. You've got Intel now spinning Altera out, back out into the world. Obviously, AMD bought Xilinx. There's not a lot of people that do FPGAs, but you guys have sort of flown under the radar, get a little bit more attention. Maybe just talk about kind of Lattice as a whole when they relate to FPGAs in the market.
Yeah, Lattice. So we're actually 40 years old. We passed our 40 years in 2023. So we've been around for a really long time, and not many semiconductor companies can say that. And that has to do with the fact that we lead when it comes to innovating power efficient architectures for both small and mid-range FPGAs. And that's what we're known for. And if you look at the company over the past, I'd say several years, we've actually moved the company where today 90% of the company revenue comes from our strategic core markets, which is communications, computing, industrial, and automotive. And as you said, FPGAs are pervasive everywhere, but that's where 90% of the revenue comes from. So we're in really good markets that have long-term cyclical growth drivers associated with them. And what we've done also over the past several years is we've really beefed up the product portfolio. And it's not just from a hardware side, but it's also from the software side. And we see that as very critical and strategic as well. So if you look at our product portfolio, we've got leadership products that are very, very differentiated for small and mid-range FPGAs. But we also augment those with software solutions that make it easier for our customers, not only to just design and these FPGAs to design the FPGAs with their applications, but also get to market much faster with what we call these software solution stacks that have predefined applications that help them get to market much, much faster as well. And so that's kind of some of the things that we've done in Lattice over the past several years that have really differentiated us in the market. And we've got a market opportunity. If you look at our SAM, we talked about this at our last Investor Day in 2023. We've got a market opportunity of about $10 billion by 2028, which is plenty of headroom to grow as FPGAs become more pervasive in the markets.
And so maybe go into a little bit of detail and kind of you talked about specific to small to mid-range FPGAs. What does that look like in terms of market segmentation? And I think you're right. I think we would say for the most part, your Intels and your AMD is focused more on the high end. They have some embedded, maybe trying for automotive, but not nearly as you guys. But they may focus more on, I guess, what we call the high end. Maybe just how do you see that market, those market segmentations as different?
Yeah, good question. Actually, it's when you look at the FPGA market, we segment the FPGA market into three simple categories. There's small FPGAs, mid-size FPGAs, and large FPGAs. And where Lattice has a leadership position historically has been in small FPGAs. And back in the end of 2019, we announced our Nexus platform. These are our platform that we've created 7 different unique device families in the small FPGA portion of the market. And recently, at the end of 2022, in December, we had a launch event for our first mid-range FPGA, which is Avant, which is very, very differentiated as well, just like our Nexus devices. And where's the differentiation of Lattice FPGAs? It's really around power. You know, we have products that are like 2.5 times lower power than competitive comparable devices. You know, we don't sacrifice performance. We've demonstrated bandwidth of 2x more than comparable devices. And we're also very unique in our small form factor. So we do that in very, very small physical sizes as well. And you'll see that like 6 times smaller in physical size compared to the comparable devices from the competition. And so those are the areas that we differentiate. And then the software and the other areas that we had talked about before as well. But those products really service the small and mid-range portion of the market. And you alluded to it as well. If you look at other FPGA companies, they have focuses in building the large FPGAs. Now, when we look at small and mid-range, what are the characteristics of those markets? Actually, there are more customers out there that will need and deploy small FPGAs in their applications. When you contrast that to large FPGAs, the number of customers and applications large FPGAs diminishes dramatically. So the majority of the uses or the mainstream applications are in small, followed by mid, and then large becomes a lot less from that perspective. And that's the area that Lattice focuses on, which is small and mid-range FPGAs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a conversation I hear a lot relative to kind of FPGAs is, why not just make an ASIC, right? There's a whole variety of things anybody can make, and whether we're talking about security and or AI and or right, that's always a debate. And I think it's a worthwhile debate, but I think kind of shedding light on why an FPGA or the advantages of an FPGA over just a basic ASIC or even a semi-custom slash semi-custom ASIC, I think will help people kind of understand this. Why is it interesting that this is really a blank slate, that you as a developer can do what you want to kind of bake in the use case you have see fit, but also really kind of land the use cases where, again, it just makes more sense for an FPGA versus just ASICs.
Yeah. So I think when you look at it from an end market application perspective or a customer, there's multiple reasons why they'll pick an FPGA over an ASIC. The first is if you decide you're going to go build your own ASIC, that's a large investment. That takes a long time to get that ASIC out. You got to get it right. If you figure out that you want to modify the design or tweak it again, then you're reworking that. You got to get it fabricated. You got to design it. And so there's a long, expensive cycle time to build your own custom ASIC. What an FPGA does is you buy a product that's off the shelf. It's already available. So it's available from time zero. You can go grab it off the shelf. It's a standard part. You work on our EDA tools. You develop your design much faster than if it were you're building your own ASIC. And you can then download and configure it within minutes. And so that allows you to have your product from a time to market much, much faster than if you were to go build your own custom ASIC. It allows you to get to market much faster. And then if you decide that you want to tweak the design, that's where the beauty of the programmability comes in. You can actually tweak it. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is independent of the time to market, the cost of developing your own ASIC, which you don't have with an FPGA. That programmability gives you some unique capabilities to really differentiate your end market, your product in the end market. And you touched on two of them, Ben. You said AI and security. So let's take those two examples that you talked about. If you were to leverage an FPGA versus an ASIC or a hardened ASSP that's already available in the market, let's say somebody built an ASIC already and they're offering that in the market. It's a standard product, an ASSP versus an FPGA. What you still get out of the FPGA is you can now differentiate your product because you're not using the same device that all your competitors are using. So what's a good example of that? You take AI. AI, there are new algorithms that are coming out. There are new use models. How do you put your own secret sauce in there? Well, you can do that with an FPGA. Now, let's say you deployed your system 6 months from now, there's a new algo. And these algos are coming out on a record basis of how you can get more efficient AI and more efficient inferencing through your algos. Well, with an FPGA, reprogram it to the new algorithm. Reprogram it with your new secret sauce. And you can enhance your system in the field without having to change that component. The same applies to security. We talk about crypto agility. Well, what is crypto agility? Crypto agility is that, we always talk about security as being a race between the adversary and those that are trying to protect the systems. Let's say at some point systems are deployed and there's a vulnerability that's identified. Well, you can't go change your security chip if it's hardened. But if it's an FPGA, you have crypto agility and you can enhance your security real time based on the new knowledge you have at that point versus when you had deployed it perhaps a year prior or 2 years prior. So that programmability is key. And it's not just within AI and security. Think about we're in the age of robotics now. Motor control algorithms, your secret sauce in computer vision. How do you improve the image? Your ISP algorithms. This gives the customers or the companies the ability to not just differentiate, but also get to market much faster and protect their secret sauce and IP within these FPGAs versus using the same device and solutions that everyone else is using.
Yeah, I think this point of differentiation is the one that's always stood out to me the most, right? Because if we're, name your product company making a device, whatever it is, right? A wearable device, a headset device, a pocketable computer, whatever it is, right? You sit there and your choice is well, I could just use all the off the shelf parts as everybody else. And so then I'm roughly in a commodity type business. Can I be cheaper? Whatever the case is. And a lot has changed in this market, really going back to where can they really double down on some differentiation. So I've always liked that story of the FPGA. And I'm sure, I know you guys don't, you want your customers to talk about, but yet nobody, kind of really shares like, well, this is how I used the FPGA to differentiate myself. So there's examples which we'll talk about, but there's also so much of that goes beyond the scenes. We can't really appreciate it, right? And so, maybe just a good example, because I thought this was a really good demo relative to security, and then we can talk about some AI stuff. But at your fall event, there was a demo for secure root of trust boot up, right? And you guys demonstrated a way that you had the fastest, lowest power time to boot. And where that matters, obviously, is because if I'm a hacker, I'm trying to secure that system or penetrate that system as fast as possible. So the fact that speed matters, right? But maybe just kind of walk through that demo, because I think it kind of shows really where the FPGA shined here in a very specific kind of security use case.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the demo and then let me give some more color on why that's really important. You kind of touched on that as well. But boot up time is really, really important. In other words, once you put the power on your semiconductor device, how fast does that take the device to actually boot up and be in a known state where it can actually function? If you look at our FPGAs, they boot up we're talking, in nanoseconds and microseconds, just really, really fast boot up times. And you contrast that to, say, a CPU, which takes a while to get the firmware, configure, and boot up. Well, what you want to do with these fast boot up times that we've demonstrated, really, really fast boot up times, is you want to be the first device that's powered on in the system in order to do a security function, and you want to be the last device to power down. That way you can ensure that while everything else is configuring and booting and coming to a known state, you're actually monitoring all the firmware, all the other hardware components, and making sure that it is in the right state to have a secure boot of, let's say, your CPU. And that's the time where, the industry's evolved enough to know that adversaries used to go after the OS and the software, but what we've recognized is you also have to protect the hardware. And so the firmware protection is also very, very important, because during that time where it takes the CPU, as an example, to boot up, your firmware is vulnerable. So you want a device that powers up really fast, which our FPGAs do, and we've demonstrated that, to be able to protect the hardware. And by the way, we've got some really unique capabilities in our security that even if that firmware was, somebody played with the firmware, changed it, or modified it, we keep a manifest and we can reload the golden image of what that firmware should have been. So we protect, detect, and recover as needed for the firmware, which is really, really critical in ensuring that your system boots up. But that's one example of why you want the fast boot up from a security perspective. The other reason you want a fast boot up, another example I can give you, is safety critical applications. When you think about safety critical application, robots in factories, avionics applications, automotive applications, when you turn on a system, you want that system to be up and going and checking and making sure that everything is safe. And that's also important for safety critical type applications as well. But that's one of the other differentiations, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's not just about power, performance, form factor, but fast boot up is another one that's important in many applications today.
Yeah, and that's an example of where, again, vast array of security applications. And again, someone can take your product and use it for that. They could use it for enhanced security persistently. There's so many options, right? That's the thing. Like these things they're not fixed in their state as to what what it could be done. Maybe talk a little bit, because I know you and I have talked about this, and there was sort of the question like of how often this happens. So I'm curious. Well, one, just kind of explain the reprogrammability aspect perhaps in the field. And then is that something where, you see that happening more often? Because I know we had talked about, it was it's happening, but it's not super prevalent. But you could argue that the extension of life and or the let's just I'm just going to throw out like an AI use case, right? The model gets updated, it happens to use a new, whatever integer or bit rate, and they want to update that in a system, right? Having that flexibility to program it in the field feels again like another one of those differentiators for FPGAs.
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects of it. We do see more and more people leveraging the programmability in the field over time. If I contrast, I said I've been in the industry for 30 years. If I go back a decade, yeah, people were using it to update stuff in the field. I see more and more people now doing that than before. But there are a lot of applications where they don't require the reprogrammability in the field, but it's about giving them the comfort feel that they can do that when they need to do that. We talked about examples around AI. That's a good example where they leverage that quite a bit. In the security scenario, they need to be able to do that from a security perspective. If they do find a vulnerability, they do leverage that. So it's one of the things that they have to have it as a backup. One of the other areas that we've seen that is, we've seen companies that have deployed equipment into the field, and not a surprise to consumers or people that use the equipment, that over time, once it's deployed, they'll have upgrades. And they'll do upgrades where they add more features, more capabilities, and that's a good another use of being able to program the FPGAs in the field. They can release it with certain features, and over time be able to add additional features as they've qualified them internally over time, but get the product out to market much faster. But yeah, there's always going to be a mix there. There's part of the customers will not use it. There's a good portion that likes it as a backup, and there's portions out there that are leveraging it today for different types of applications.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So maybe talk about the market. I think it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, Xilinx off the table. Very very tricky now to track the market relative to their sort of quarterly earnings and where they see the thing going. Altera spinning out, so you're going to see some of that. But you guys playing a little bit of different. But the one thing I think is super interesting is just sort of understanding, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just making this observation, but maybe I'm crazy. But I somewhat feel like the cyclicality within FPGAs is different than the cyclicality of some other sectors of the market. And so I'm curious kind of how you see that. Is that just because product cycles differ? What's some of those things where if I'm following this, whether I'm an investor or I'm just somebody looking at trends, I can kind of understand where I might see momentum, right? Or maybe some cyclicality as it relates to the market for FPGAs.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it generalities, and then maybe I'll talk more about Lattice specifically. I think we service end markets that go through cycles. If you look at FPGAs and you look at Lattice, we're in communications, we're in compute, we're in industrial, we're in automotive, and we're in pervasive in a bunch of different applications. No company is immune to when end markets go through cyclical downturns or when they come out of it. I mean, we all benefit and we all see it. I think the difference is, if I look at it from a Lattice perspective, is that if you look, historically over the last few years, we've outperformed the general performances of those end markets. In other words, another way to look at it is there's more adoption of our FPGAs, whether that be share gains or more adoption of our FPGAs into applications in industrial, server, compute applications, and automotive. So we've outperformed overall for the past few years, which means we gain shares. I'll give you a good example of what I'm referring to. If you look at the server market as an example, we talk at Lattice about the fact that every new generation of server that gets deployed, whether it be an Intel new generation, an AMD, we're processor agnostic, it doesn't matter, it could be an ARM processor. For every new generation of server that gets deployed, we're seeing that our attach rate is increasing in every new generation. And because the complexity of what's happening in servers, we see that the types of FPGAs that they're using from Lattice have more capabilities, which drives, on average, a higher ASP. So if you look at the dollar content we have from one generation to the next generation, if you take the generation that's ramping up today versus the prior generation, we estimated that the dollar content per server is going up by approximately 50%. So that's 50% more dollar content per generation of server. So if you look at it from that perspective, you would say, okay, so even if the server market is flat, we benefited within Lattice. If the
Right,
server
right.
market is down, depends on how much down it is, we still have some benefit. So it kind of makes it look like we're off cycle. It's just because we're benefiting more because our attach rate is higher, ASPs are higher. But the reality is, yes, we're not immune to cyclicals, but we have our own lattice-specific growth drivers that help us weather it better than most. And that example I gave for the server market, we take that same approach when we look at industrial accounts, automotive accounts, how do we drive more attach rate, how do we bring more application value to our end customers. And so that's kind of what drives the slightly different trend that you'll see from Lattice compared to other companies.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're also saying, I think we had talked about this too, or you've shared this also at Investor Days, that um, not just the dollar content, but the number of FPGAs per product or category is growing. So essentially, their product designers are filling more gaps as complexity or as they push the limits of compute, which they want to do in any of these things. So they're actually deploying more FPGAs per product category as well. So that number's going up per product.
Correct, correct. You know, customers, and we work with our customers very closely. We work with the architects. They're finding more new, innovative ways to be able to leverage FPGAs in their systems, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe talk a little bit about China. We bring this up a lot, and Jay loves to ask this question, and he's absent today for a variety of reasons. But Jay loves to ask this question because he loves about China. I know they obviously we use some of your products, but at the same time, I think they're trying to become more homogeneous and developing their own homegrown stuff. Do you see maybe any of those companies showing up on a global landscape, or is it largely isolated to China? What's kind of your read on what's going on in the China market for that?
Yeah, I think you articulated well. I mean, there's no surprise to anyone that reads the papers that they're trying to build their own domestic semiconductor industry. That's nothing to do with FPGAs specifically. That's just the overall semiconductor industry trend that people talk about. But when it comes to FPGAs, what I can share with you is it's not easy to be an FPGA company. And I say that
Hmm.
because, you know, Lattice has been around for 40 years, as well as the other top two FPGA suppliers that are out there. We're all 40 years old. We all started the companies within about a year and a half of each other. And if you go back from that, I guess it's 41 years now to today, it's still the three premier FPGA companies that are still driving the vast, vast majority of FPGA volume worldwide, with Lattice having the largest install base. Um, why is it not easy to become an FPGA company? I had a chart actually, and I don't think I've ever showed you this chart, but it's basically over the last, I would say, 41 years, every company that announced they're getting into the FPGA business, whether it be a startup or a larger company, when they announced it and when they shut the door, they say, yeah, we're getting out of this business. It's a difficult market to get into because the barrier to entry is very, very high. And that's about 52 companies that I've tracked thus far, domestic and foreign companies that have tried to get into the FPGA market. And the barrier is high because it's not just the complexity of building a piece of silicon that can do many functions. And in the FPGA world, we say infinite amount of functions you have to verify. But it's a lot of different functions, a lot of complexity, and the architectures of how you make these efficient. If you can't make it efficient, then you lose the value, lose the differentiation in the market. It's not just the hardware, it's the software as well. You know, we're building really complex EDA tools, and these tools, we've got now 40 years of experience of building these tools. And the demand on these tools goes up every year. Customers want more. They want team-based design. They want better accuracy on quality of results. They want, you know, timing-driven place and route that optimizes for power, optimizes for a
Right,
particular function. And so building those suite of software tools, you know, that's a big barrier to have that
right.
maturity in your software tools. And it's not just the software tools, it's all the IP that comes with it. If you think about FPGAs today and how they're growing in complexity and becoming larger and larger, it's hard for a customer to come and say, well, I'm going to use a 100,000 gate FPGA and I'm going to build this function. And do I have to build it all from scratch? Well, there's an expectation that the FPGA companies have a lot of the building blocks already built for them to ease them into that design. And so there's a lot of history and heritage of building all these IPs that are readily available for our customers that's hard to have from day one or day two or year 5 or year 10. We're talking about 40 years of building IP into a catalog that companies can leverage.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you take the hardware complexity, the software complexity, the IP complexity, and then you add on top of it the fact that our industry requirements around safety critical, quality, certifications has just gone up over time. There's a lot of barriers that you have to break to be able to be a successful FPGA company. And so, history has shown those companies that have made it, and history will tell in the future who makes it as well. But I think the bottom line is, if it was easy to build an FPGA, there'd be plenty of successful FPGA companies out there, and there's not.
There is not. That is correct. In fact,
There's a
prior
few.
to prior to Intel now respinning out Altera, you were the only independent FPGA company left in the world. So definitely not easy. So that's helpful context. All right. So last topic. I know this is also very very broad, but again, speaking to the flexibilities of FPGA, let's talk about AI. And I know there's a couple of very specific implementations to this what do we want to say, budding category of the AI PC coming. That's actually kind of interesting around how kind of FPGAs were used as a
Yeah.
differentiator for some PC vendors. So let's start with AI. I mean, one, do you see any kind of like home run roles for the FPGA in AI? Like, are there certain things where you're like, you know what, this is a because a lot of people discuss, well, let's just move it on to the SoC. Let's run all of this on the NPU and yada yada, and that's fine, and that's going to happen. But when you look at kind of how people are talking to you guys about deploying these things, are there certain things where you're like, yep, this is exactly kind of where we see they're going to shine versus an SoC, or even a custom accelerator as it relates to some AI tasks.
Yeah. So I think AI is a great mega trend. It's a good inflection point in the industry, and that drives usage of FPGAs. And when I look at AI, you kind of alluded to two different categories there, but I'm going to kind of make it clear. There's AI in the data center, which is, you're doing AI machine learning in a data center. You're building these GPUs, or you've got AI specific servers that are being deployed in data centers. Lattice plays a key role in that. In those servers, we're doing a lot of the control, management, and security type functions. Those are all opportunities for us within Lattice. So as you see deployment of AI servers in data centers, we benefit from that. In fact, I talked earlier about our attach rate in the server market. If you look at our attach rate on these AI specific servers, our attach rates tends to be equal to those of general purpose or much, much higher. So
Mm,
we benefit
mm,
from that. We benefit from that from the functions that we do in servers. But then there's another side of AI, which is let's call it edge AI. In edge AI, you need low power and performance to do your edge AI applications. And that's an area where Lattice has seen some good traction on that. And one of the examples that we've given is what we do on client devices. And you alluded to that as well. If you look at the PC and client markets, I think most recently we talked about Dell, we've talked about Lenovo in the past, and there's others that they're leveraging our FPGA and they put it by the camera. And
yeah.
we're doing a lot of AI workloads on the Lattice, very small, power efficient FPGAs. And so we'll do AI functions where it recognizes you approaching your laptop, it'll turn the screen on. You move away or you don't look at it, it shuts the screen. So you're saving battery life. And what we've shown with our customers is that you think about you and I in conference rooms, and we're looking at a presentation and our laptop is on and it's just wasting battery, or you're in your desk and you move away, come back. We've shown that we can get up to an hour saving in battery life by just adding that intelligence on our FP. presence detection. But
Mm.
there's other AI functions we can do, like shoulder surfing. If somebody's behind you at a coffee shop or an airport, not a big deal. But if they're behind you and looking at your screen, well, we can tell you. We see, hey, artificial intelligence, there's somebody actually paying attention to your screen. We can warn you. We can tell you what you can tell us what to do, and we'll go ahead and do that as well. There's wellness stuff. There's collaboration things that we do to help the image and center the person in collaboration meetings. There's a lot of these use models that you see being deployed on client devices today that Lattice plays a role in. And it's not just the hardware again, it's our software solutions that come with it that actually implement these use models for our customers. So I think about AI, there's a lot of exciting things happening in the automotive world, in the compute world, also at the data center with the servers that Lattice has been benefiting from and will continue to benefit as we bring out these innovative products that are very low power and don't sacrifice performance.
Yeah, and I think that's a good sort of use case. I mean, the vendors that I've talked to, when they're looking at where they're seeing some of these applications, talk a lot about how they're using them really for battery life management. Sometimes even just managing
And
the core thermals better. You know.
it's battery life and it's user experience. Like they want people to enjoy using the laptop. You can think about our phones. There's a lot of applications that we do on our phones. People are, sometimes addicted to their phones. But what you want to do is take these intelligence and these AI capabilities and make the user experience much better on a client device. And that includes battery life, but the collaboration, the wellness, the security stuff that we can provide through artificial intelligence.
Yeah, yeah. Super interesting stuff, and I think there's a lot more. I'm guessing that's going to come out on specific implementations for FPGAs because I know some of the vendors want to actually talk about this, so they can say, "Look what I did! Like I've made
Yeah.
myself different than other
Yeah.
people." And so I think we'll see more of those, which will be great, right? In terms of those trying to follow and cover Lattice's products. So this is good, really good discussion. Greatly appreciate your time. I thought it was rich on FPGAs, and so we'll have to have you back more often to talk about the wide world of FPGAs and where it's going.
I really appreciate you having me here, Ben, and look forward to more conversations. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been a good episode of The Circuit, and make sure you like, subscribe, share on socials, and we'll talk to you next week.